Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
From the New Forest, where it's slightly overcast and chilly. We're back in the puffer jackets. It's been
got my blanket back out.
very windy here overnight. Such a shame after Saturday and Sunday being so sunny, so warm, lots of insect activity, all sorts of things going on.
Lots of stuff going on, beautiful weather. We had some great sights when we were out in the woods walking the dogs by the house.
Certainly did, which was good.
Nice.
Dogs are in the garden playing away, thankfully outside at the moment. A little while ago, Nancy heard a bumblebee buzzing in Hobart, Tasmania, and started barking at it. Just about anything sets them off. Anyway, we're looking forward to another great week here. Oh, yeah. So we've got plenty of things coming up. Sound Approach, what's on today, Booth?
Sound Approach. So, of course, all of last week we were asking you to go onto Twitter and follow @Sound Approach UK. This morning I went to check up on Sound Approach to see what the bird of the day was. Have a listen to this. It's one that you should all really recognise. It was actually duetting with a wild one there just a second ago. That started playing and then it actually started going off over there.
Yeah.
So it is our largest tit in the UK. It's very adaptable and we see it all throughout our cities, our gardens. It likes woodland as well. Of course, it is the great tit. I think it's a beautiful little bird, very distinctive with that black head, with that white patch. Gorgeous.
But they do have a great range of calls and songs. So although that was obviously great, many of the other little calls that you hear whilst you're out and about walking in the woods at this time or in your gardens are probably great. Yeah,
but that's very distinctive though, isn't it? That's one of the most distinctive call, that two-tone.
Brilliant definition there. But we've decided, but others have decided that we've had enough of Skull of the Day. I've never had enough of Skull of the Day. So we've got a new quiz. We've got a new quiz, which is taking over from Skull of the Day. And it's some artwork that's been provided by Phil Barnett. And you can follow Phil on Twitter. Now, his Twitter tag is @SquinancyWart1. @SquinancyWart1. Phil is a complete polymath. He does some brilliant paintings. He takes some beautiful photographs. At this time of year, he's always photographing buds emerging. He also writes some poetry. Following him on Twitter is always a great reward. And a few years ago, he posted these artistic abstract designs. So here's the first one. Each one of them represents an animal which you can find in the UK. So have a look at this one. What do you think? So this one's an example. It's got that blue panel there, the plum colour, the black and the white. It is, of course, a jay. Phil's reduced the jay to a series of blocks of colour and patterns, and you can still recognise it, which is great.
Love that.
Very
great idea.
skillful. Yeah. So what about this one? This is the actual quiz. So if you think you know what this one is, send your answers in. Okay. There you go. Colours and patterns.
Very distinctive there. Very yellow, distinctive, the brown, the red.
Oh, don't give too much away.
I'm just describing.
Don't give too much away.
So many of you have been very, very busy over the Easter bank holiday. You've been getting out there and getting creative, and you've been sending some amazing drawings, photos, and everything out in between into us. And one that I really wanted to show you was this drawing of a starling. This was sent in to us by Andy Ashman. He's drawn it from a photograph that he's taken. And I think the most beautiful thing about this is when you look at a starling in certain light, they look, ordinary dark birds. But as soon as the sun shines on them, they start glowing.
Structural colour,
exactly. They start glowing because of the gloss and the way that the light waves hit those feathers and bounce off those air cavities within the feather that we spoke about last week. That's how we see that diversity of colour in those feathers. Oh, isn't it beautiful?
Great drawing.
I love it.
From his own
Absolutely
photograph.
Love it. Well done, Andy.
Emily Joachim put a pond in her garden, and look at this. Almost immediately, a frog's moved in. It's there, look, just beneath the piece of slate, providing an exit for anything that's fallen in and wants to get straight back out again. And then also, she was hunting around her garden, and she found this, the telltale sign, the little black poo pellets of the hedgehog. Lots of other people have been sending in things that they've seen in their garden over the weekend. Dominic Woodfield has come up with something called sky scanning. Apparently he invented this a few years ago. Basically, you lie in your garden looking straight up at the sky. therapeutic form of, I don't know, visual yoga, really, but also looking out for birds. In the past, he spotted osprey, and over the course of the weekend, he got skylark, sparrowhawk, and grey wagtail, all surprising birds to see in his garden. Sky
It's not
scanning.
bad though. I quite like that. It's like people watching, isn't it? But of course, we can't do people watching. I'm a big fan of people watching.
Yeah,
But you know, why not just lie back and watch the birds?
I may not sky scan today, though.
No, it's pretty miserable.
I'm going to face full of rain in a minute. Should be sky scanning down here.
Great idea, though. Great concept.
Okay.
Well, over the last few days, on Thursday and Friday, our last broadcast, we went to Birds of Poole Harbour, to Poole Morton, to find out what was going on with the translocation project of ospreys down there. So today we have another clip for you to give you a little bit of detail about the romance going on between two particular ospreys. Take a look at this.
Right, good morning everybody and welcome back to sunny Dorset. My name's Paul Morton from the Birds of Poole Harbour charity, and this morning we're going to give you a bit of an update and some detail about the new Poole Harbour Osprey nest cam and birds that you can actually see, and another bird that we're really hoping and keeping everything crossed for, our arms, our legs, our fingers, our toes, everything. To give you a bit of a backstory as to how we've got to this stage. So we started our translocation back in 2017, and we first of all in that first year only brought 8 chicks down from Scotland to Poole Harbour. But something really interesting happened that we weren't expecting at all. Now she's called CJ7, okay, and she has nothing to do with our Poole Harbour translocation project. She is actually a wild bird from a wild nest up at Rutland Water, and she hatched in 2015. But what happened was quite remarkable. In that first year when we did our translocation in 2017, she was back in the UK for the very first time. Not in Poole Harbour, we don't know where she'd been during the summer. But what happened was we'd just released our first batch of birds, kind of very end of July, beginning of August, when CJ7 happened to be migrating south back to her wintering site in Africa. And just at the time we released our chicks, she appeared in Poole Harbour, you know, to probably catch a fish, have a bit of a rest, a stopover, and she found the chicks, and she spent about a week, this was on the 8th of August, she found the chicks and then spent about a week or so really bonding with them, associating with them, feeding with them, roosting with them. Anyway, we didn't think too much of it. The birds all left, CJ7 left, and we thought, you know, well, that was the end of that. In May 2018, so the following spring, a blue-ringed osprey turned up in Poole Harbour, and we managed to track it down, and it was her, it was CJ7, she'd come back. Now in her mind, having encountered the chicks the previous autumn, she thinks in her head that somewhere within Poole Harbour there are mating ospreys, and that actually potentially there are males there for her. So her draw was to come back to the harbour and have a bit of a look around. Now, as Tim explained on Friday, the females can be drawn away from their natal sites. They don't always have to nest where they themselves were raised. Anyway, she turned up in Poole Harbour that May 2018, spent a few weeks looking, but you know, there were no males there. So she spent the rest of the summer just fishing, bumming around, not doing a great deal, until we released our chicks in 2018, and she did exactly the same thing. She found the release site, she found the chicks, spent, you know, a good week or two associating with them, bonding with them, feeding with them, and so her maternal instincts got really strong, and her bond to Poole Harbour became, you know, even stronger. But she left on migration later in that autumn, and you know, that was the kind of the end of that, and our chicks left in that year as well, in the August. Then in 2019 something incredible happened. She turned up on the 1st of April and landed on a nest platform in Poole Harbour and started nest building, bringing lots of sticks, lots of moss, grass, all those kind of things, hoping and waiting, because now she really thinks that there are ospreys in Poole Harbour available for her to pair with. And she, you know, went through all this amazing behaviour that we hadn't seen before. So this was spring last year, waiting for a male to turn up. Sadly, a male didn't turn up early enough in the spring. However, last year was also the first time that one of our chicks from the project could also arrive into the UK for the first time. You know, 2-year-olds arrive, you know, a couple of years later. So 2019 was the first year one of our birds could come back. And one did. On the 12th of June 2019, one of our birds, a male called LS7, arrived back in the harbour. And I'm not joking, within minutes of him entering Poole Harbour airspace, she pounced on him. And the two struck a bond immediately and spent the whole of June, the whole of July, the whole of August visiting lots of different nest platforms around Poole Harbour, solidifying and strengthening their bond together. And they were inseparable, and it was lovely to see. And then here we are, spring 2020, it's April 12th today. CJ7 arrived back into Poole Harbour on the 2nd of April, so only a day later than last year. And we're waiting for LS7 to turn up. Now, he's only going to be 3 years old this year, so it is likely he will turn up a bit later in April. It could be any time between now and late April, maybe even early May, but we're keeping everything crossed that it's sooner rather than later, because she is in pure nesting mode. Anyone that's been watching the webcam over the last 3 or 4 days will see she has been nest scraping, she's been bringing sticks, and she is really in the zone. So if LS7 was to turn up, within the next couple of days, then it could be game on. If he turns up too late in April into early May, then her breeding instinct for this season probably would have passed, and we might have missed the season. So thank you so much to everyone that's been tuning in. We've been watching the viewing figures go up and up and up and up over the last couple of days. It's been amazing to watch. We've all been really enjoying watching her, studying the behaviour. The other day she was warding off red kites from the nest, which was really cool. LS7, come on mate, please, please, please. I've never wanted and willed a bird back so much in all my life, but yeah. So everyone, please keep your fingers crossed for LS7 in his safe return, and let's see what happens over the next few weeks. We'll be sure to give you an update if he returns, when he returns, and do another nice little video for you. So hope you've all had a nice Easter. Let's keep those fingers crossed. Thank you.
Come on, LS7. I mean, I had one eye looking at that live cam all weekend, just constantly checking to see if he had returned or not. What an amazing story. Spent so long bonding last year. Now hopefully the first year for breeding ospreys in the south of the UK.
If the bird was satellite tracked, we'd know exactly where it is. Send out a message saying, hurry up, get
Come
back.
on.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we actually know that LS7 is alive. That's the other thing.
That's it.
Because those young ospreys have been down to Gambia and Senegal over the winter, where there's an enormous abundance of fish. Most of the UK young ospreys go down there for the winter. And fingers crossed he's on his way back somewhere in France, just nudging his way further.
He'll be on his back. I have faith in LS7. Okay. I believe in him. He can do it.
Otherwise nothing's going to happen.
So we got sent in another photo. This one is from Gary Black, a picture of a goldfinch. Take a look at this. Now, birds are known for their immense diversity, their colours, their different shapes, the shapes of their bills. What they're not so widely known for is the diversity of their tongues. And looking at this photo, I got inspired to have a little look more about the tongues of birds. And I have to say, I was not disappointed. Have a look at this. I've done some drawings. This is a drawing of an Anna's hummingbird tongue. Look at this. So of course we know that hummingbirds primarily feed on nectar and pollen. They also will take insects too. The thing about the tongue is that it's very, like the bill, it's very indicative of what they might eat, what they might be preying upon. So this of course is put into the flower like this. We've got two tips, very flexible edges here to twist around in that flower. They've got this feathered pilia as well coming through here to help the surface area increase, to get as much pollen and nectar in as possible, and then it retracts into the bird's bill, lies very flat. These two tips here lie together, and the pilia here
forked tongue.
Forked tongue, but you wouldn't see that in the actual bird because they lie together flat. How amazing is that?
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you've got birds with forked tongues.
That's a
like
hummingbird.
reptiles.
Oh,
That's
just
cool.
you wait.
Oh,
just
really?
you wait. Just you wait. Look at what's here. This one, I'm going to start at the bottom here. This is, let's make sure you see that okay. This is the tongue of a barn owl. So this, the wind is not very good. The tip here is keratinized, meaning that it's a little bit tougher. That obviously helps it eat the carrion, which it predates on. The tongue has got a rasp edge that helps pull the flesh off bones and things like that. And then you've also got down here something called papillae, which are these structures that direct the food back to the esophagus and enable the bird to swallow it a little bit more efficiently. Now have a look at this one. This is the tongue of an avocet. So different from the barn owl. It's actually very small in the bill. The avocet tongue only kind of is about a third of that whole bill. You can see that there's no papillae, only this rough edge at the bottom near the base of the tongue. This helps direct food swallow very smooth, and of course avocets are filter feeders. So it's quite unusual actually, the avocet, because it should have lots of papillae which help it filter the mud and the water out to get the concentration of the food it needs. However, it's flat, which is quite interesting for the avocet. Avocet tongue. Have a look at this one. So this is the cinnamon teal tongue. This is more common of a filter feeder. You've got the papillae coming off the tip of the tongue here on the sides. Again, pushing that water, pushing that mud through that it doesn't need, and concentrating all the prey that it can then direct back through the tongue into the esophagus. And now, my particular favourite is the penguin. Have a look at that. Now, this is quite common for seabirds, that the whole tongue is filled with papillae. Penguins have this to an exaggerated level. Now, if you think about seabirds, they are catching their prey in the water. Very, very difficult when you're trying to catch speedy fish. They can't go up onto land to manipulate the prey, to use its feet to help it digest. So they have to have something in particular. So they use the papillae to help grasp their fish and help direct it through the esophagus. So that's why you've got a very characteristic tongue for penguins and other seabirds too. How cool is this? Diversity of tongues. I'm so excited by this.
I didn't know about the forked tongue at all. Tongue.
Amazing.
Well, what about taste? I can tell you something interesting about penguins and taste, if you like. So when it comes down to taste, there are 5 things which we can taste: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And umami is a name for the meaty taste that we have. Now, when it comes to umami, bitter, and sweet, the chemicals in the tongue that are required to generate the response, to send the signals to the brain, don't work in the cold. They can't function when it's cold. So what we've seen that is in animals like whales and dolphins and seals and penguins, they can't manifest these sorts of tastes. No bitter, sweet, and umami. Now, penguins, of course, are feeding on fish. That's that umami, fishy, meaty taste. But they can't taste it because the chemicals aren't there to function in their mouths. Fish, on the other hand, have the full suite of salty and umami taste, and they have taste receptors on the outside of their body, on their gills, and on a structure called the lateral line, a sensory area which runs down the side of the fish's body. So the punchline to my story is that when a penguin is swallowing a fish live, it can't taste it, but the fish can taste the penguin as it slides down its esophagus.
That's my favourite thing.
What
of all
about
my
that?
facts about natural history, I have to say that one is up there.
I like that one.
It's good.
When it comes to facts about natural history, we're really pleased to say that we're joined by a man now who's got plenty of them. Professor Dave Goulson works at the University of Sussex. He's renowned for his studies into the ecology and conservation of insects, particularly bumblebees. He's won the Marsh Prize or Award? The Marsh Award for Conservation Biology. He's also written a suite of best-selling books, A Buzz in the Meadow, and then last year, The Garden Jungle. Dave is also a fantastic bloke. I've had the pleasure of working with him a number of times. A great enthusiast, set up the Bumblebee Conservation Trust too. Dave, over to you down in Sussex. I'm afraid we haven't got a sunny morning for you to be out in your garden with all the bugs and bees, but I'm sure you've got something for us.
Sure. Morning, Chris. Morning, Megan. I'm really sorry I'm not outside. We tried setting this up outside, but the wind was howling past and it was freezing cold and gave up in the end. So you just have to imagine flowers and bees and all that kind of thing. So I'm here to make a pitch for the importance of insects. I know this is the self-isolating bird club, but obviously insects are way more interesting and important than birds. I think they are anyway. I've been nuts about insects all my life. I don't know where it came from. It was just, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I started collecting caterpillars from around the edges of the school playground and taking them home and trying to rear them up and whatever. And my youngest son is the same now. He loves insects. But the sad truth is that actually most people, I think, are frightened of them. Most teenagers and adults, if something buzzes towards them, their immediate reaction is to roll up a newspaper and squash it, which is kind of sad, really, because as I started out by saying, insects are really cool. and they're really important. And so my sort of mission in life, if you like, is to try and persuade people to love insects, or at least to not squash them, which would be a step in the right direction. So sadly, insects, of course, they are in decline, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom. We've got more things to worry about at the moment, but there's lots of evidence that butterflies and moths and bees and hoverflies are in decline. And there was a study from Germany hit the newspaper headlines a couple of years ago that described a 75% drop in the abundance of flying insects in Germany in just the last 26 years, which is pretty scary, because insects, whether you like them or not, they do all sorts of really important stuff. They are, if you do like birds, and I guess there may be one or two people here that quite like birds, they're food for most birds, either throughout their life or when they're chicks. They need the protein from insects. And of course, they're food for bats and lizards and frogs and all sorts of other things. And they're biocontrol agents. They help to eat pests, which admittedly are often insects themselves, but hey, they help to keep the soil healthy. They recycle dead bodies and leaves and cowpats, and they do basically anything that happens on land or in fresh water probably involves an insect. So if they do disappear, then we'd be in big trouble. Obviously, the most famous thing they do for us is they pollinate our crops. 3/4 of the crops we grow in the world need insects to pollinate them. Bees, butterflies, moths, hoverflies, and so on are all important pollinators, and are all really fascinating little creatures, and deserve looking after. And that kind of brings me back to, well, I wish I was sitting in my garden, because a lot of these conservation stories are really kind of doom and gloom, aren't they? You know, people feel helpless about climate change or rainforest being chopped down or whatever. But actually, insects live all around us in our gardens. There was a study from Leicestershire for a little urban garden, and they found very nearly 2,000 species of insects living in this tiny little suburban garden. Now, there's about 500,000 hectares of gardens in the UK, which is a bigger area than all of our nature reserves. And so I've got this sort of slightly daft dream, I guess, of just imagine what it would be like if we could persuade everybody to turn their gardens into kind of little insect nature reserves, or just nature reserves, to encourage wildlife, because that would create this massive network of habitats right across the country. And maybe if we could get councils on board so that the road verges were planted with wildflowers, and the roundabouts and the cemeteries and the parks and so on, then that could go a huge way to reversing these insect declines. So anyway, my latest book, sorry for the terrible blatant plug, but The Garden Jungle, Chris just mentioned, is basically about how to make your garden insect friendly. And there are lots of really simple things people can do, things like planting the right kinds of flowers, and there's lots of information out there about which flowers are really good for bees and butterflies and so on. Not mowing your lawn quite so often is a great step forward. It saves the petrol, and you'll usually find there are dandelions and daisies and clovers and buttercups and all sorts of flowers that just spring up if you don't mow your lawn too often. Lots of other little things you can do, like putting up a bee hotel, and we've got a video clip of some bee hotels in my garden, and that's a really cool project for parents to do with their kids. You know, we've all, or many of us, have got time on our hands. We find ourselves stuck at home. What better thing to do than to spend that time on little projects to encourage wildlife in the garden? So bee hotels we'll come back to in a second. You might also try making a hoverfly lagoon, which is a less well-known and kind of cool thing. You can find instructions on the internet, which is a habitat for some types of hoverfly that like to breed in little puddles. You can make a compost heap. You can stop using pesticides. There's loads of things that you can do or stop doing. And if we could all do them, or if we could persuade enough people, imagine we could get, you know, hundreds of thousands of people engaged with this, all making their gardens wildlife friendly. I think that would be absolutely brilliant. So I'm hoping now we can cut to these pretty rubbish videos I made in my garden, which show some of the bee hotels that I've made, and which are, so when the video was made, the main occupants of bee hotels were still asleep for the winter. They were still hibernating. But now, the last few days when it was warm and sunny, they were all emerging and swarming around these bee hotels. So you'll have to imagine bees and buzzing and so on, because actually there was none when the video was made. So I'm hoping now we can cut to the video. Yeah, sure. I don't know. I haven't got the video playing myself, and I sent it in 2 weeks ago, so I'm kind of running blind at this point. Can we hear the sound on the video?
I love that concept that, you know, we have so many gardens, green space collectively, and if we were all to do something, if one person did something in their garden, I mean, we could join up and make such a huge, well, as you say, jungle for our insects. It would be fantastic.
Dave's book, The Garden Jungle, is excellent. It's a bestseller, actually, and it's a perfect time to get that, because it's full of inspirational things that you can be doing in your garden, and they're not just the obvious things as well. There's a lot there about making sure that there's nectar throughout the course of the year, offering all sorts of suggestions as to which types of plants you should put there. And these, you know, as Dave says, we have got a bit of time on our hands at the moment. This is an opportunity that we otherwise wouldn't be afforded to make our gardens a little bit more wildlife friendly. And as Dave, you know, pointed out, yes, it's the self-isolating bird club, but there'd be no birds about.
There'd be no birds without insects, and insects are the fundamentals of everything, aren't they?
It also, I mean, I think part of the advantage of, you know, trying to make wildlife gardens more wildlife friendly is not just that it will benefit the wildlife, but also then that it's an opportunity to kind of reconnect people and wildlife, you know, to invite the wildlife to come and live with us, basically, so that our kids grow up, you know, seeing bumblebees and butterflies and all these other insects, and so they don't end up as teenagers being frightened of them, because they're familiar and they understand them and they've learned to love them, which would be great. Maybe it's a crazy dream, but wouldn't that be lovely?
Oh, it would be so amazing.
To finish up, over the course of the weekend, we've had a number of queen bumblebees out and about at this time of year. Beautiful, large insects looking for their nest, and they are charming things for people to engage with, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people don't understand all the different types, and they get a bit confused. And you know, many people think there's just the honeybee that lives in a hive, but actually most of the bees you notice are these big bumblebees, which are kind of the wild relatives of honeybees, and they tend to be the commonest of the bees in our garden. And as you say, at this time of year, they're these beautiful queens, which are the biggest and fattest of them all. They don't use the bee hotels that we showed the video of. Those bee hotels attract some species of solitary bee, which essentially they don't live in a social group with a queen and workers. It's the individual female bees will find one of those holes and fill it full of pollen and lay eggs on her own. She has no help from anybody else. But there's actually about 270 different species of bee in the UK, and you could easily get 50 or 60 in your garden. The record is I think about 90. So you know, it's a challenge to see how many you can attract and look after.
A bee bioblitz, I think, is necessary. So I had a quick question for you. Do you have any recommendations for people? Obviously, we're spending as much time in our gardens as we can, but not everybody has gardens at this point. Do you have any recommendations of what people could do on their windowsills or to do in smaller areas to help insects into their gardens and personal space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, actually, pollinators are really good at finding flowers. So even if you've just got a balcony or a roof terrace or just a window box, grow some of the right kinds of flowers, and even on the 10th floor of a block of flats, the insects will sniff them out. So actually, my first recommendation would be to grow some herbs, things like marjoram. Is a really good plant for pollinators, and of course you can cook with it as well. So marjoram, chives, rosemary, thyme are all really they all grow well in a pot, and they're all good for bees, and you can use them for cooking too. So you know, wins all round.
Multi-purpose.
Exactly.
I've got one more question that was sent in. Someone mentioned that they've been seeing more bumblebees this year. Could this be the case, or are we just noticing stuff more?
I don't know. I was talking about this yesterday, and I honestly don't think we know the answer. But it does seem to be a good year for particularly these big queen bumblebees, because they do wobble up and down every year. You know, some years are better than others, and we're never quite sure why. But maybe, you know, the lack of traffic, the lack of fumes, the sort of fact that humans are doing less at the moment might be benefiting insects. It'd be nice to think it was.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Dave, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Stuff. Hope the sun comes back out, get back out into your garden.
The forecast is good.
Excellent. Good. Excellent. Cheers, Dave.
So throughout the week, we have been joined by Lindsey Chapman. I said throughout the week, throughout this whole period of live streaming, we've been joined by Lindsey Chapman, who's been asking some of your questions and featuring some of your amazing videos and photos that you've been sending in. So today, of course, she's joining us again. Hi, Lindsey, how are you?
Morning. Yes, I'm all right. Thank you very much. It's quite chilly here in Manchester, so I've gone with a coat, Chris and Megs. You'll be pleased to know. I've definitely seen more queen bumblebees here, by the way. It's really noticeable. So fascinating to see the chat talking about that as well. Just a couple of shout outs. Di Gill got in touch before today's broadcast and said she'd been really missing us over the weekend. Di, hello, we're back in town. Prentice as well, Sarah in France, bonjour to you. Barbara in Aberdeen, Justin in Lincoln, 4-year-old Flint in Galloway, hello to all of you. And Kate Davis, Megs, if you remember the sound you played at the beginning, the great tip, it's the first one that Kate's got right. Good work, Kate. Alexandra says she's glad she's not a fish after your penguin story, Chris. And LS7 getting a huge amount of encouragement. So you will have to keep up with that story for everyone, because it's gone mad on the chat. Many of you talking to each other now on our live stream, which is really, really, really wonderful. Talking about what you've been doing over the bank holiday weekend, self-isolating, staying safe inside your houses and your gardens as well. And I just want to come back to the ponds, because there's a lot of chat about that. So a couple of ponds to show you. Ullapool Shark Ambassador Mum sent this tweet. So inspired by Green-fingered George, remember we had him on, that they've made a pond in their garden and it's 1 dad long. So that's the official measurement there of that pond. It is 1 dad long. And replying to that, William Bissett said, good work. I've had a pond now for a year and it's doing really, really well. Helen's been on this morning. She says that inspired by both of you, she's upgraded her pond from a bucket in the garden to a larger wildlife pond. So people really are doing these things, which is ace. And Ronan Adelaide, their frog spawners changing into tadpoles. And a quick one for Dave, thought Dave would like this. Is this from Bruno Schroeder, who's watching live in Belgium every single day, taking this fantastic picture of a jumping spider eating its prey, and look at the iridescence on the wings there. So really people getting in touch from all over the place. Keep doing so. I'm coming back on Friday. So Lindsey_Chapman on Twitter. Send me your stuff. It's brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Lindsey.
Lindsey.
Thanks, Lindsey. Okay, we've come to the end. We're going to wrap up the quiz, I think. So, here was the quiz. Phil Barnett, Squinancy Wart 1 on Twitter. Do follow him. Fantastic stuff. This is one of his designs here. Let's see who got it right first.
So we have quite a few people getting this right. So well done. On Facebook, we've got Dave, Oliver, Carly, Yvonne, Joni, Julia. Twitter, there's Deeds, Denise, Darren and Sam. YouTube, Sel, Shane. Well done, Shane. Nice to see you back. Hope you had a good weekend. And Paul, Haley and Mike. So well done, everyone who did that.
Okay, look at the colours, look at the patterns. It's a goldfinch. I love Phil's ideas of reducing British wildlife to these simple geometric patterns. A little bit of Mondrian
It's
in there.
megapixels,
Piet
isn't it?
Mondrian.
Lovely.
Yes, just steal the movement. Let's not get into art at this time of the day. Let's not get into art. And we've got some more of those coming up in the week. We started relatively easy. Phil's got some quite tough ones, so we will start to make them a little bit more difficult. Not all birds as well. Some of them are animals.
Now I have to hold my hands up and say at the beginning of the live stream, I made a little bit of a mistake. So we got this gorgeous drawing sent in of a starling by Andy Ashdown. I said Andy Ashman, I meant Andy Ashdown. So apologies, Andy. Brilliant drawing though. Brilliant drawing. And we've got lots coming up next week, haven't we?
Yeah, for this week we've got Gillian Burke is going to be joining us tomorrow. We've got some live bats, some
Live
bats which have been injured and can't be rehabilitated back into the wild, act as great ambassadors for bats. Kate Bradbury is going to be talking to us a little bit about wildlife gardening. She also has been writing some great books. And The Bumblebee Flies Away was one that she wrote, which is really, really good. And prolific author, great all-round birder and naturalist Stephen Moss will be joining us, I think, on Friday.
I think so. Of course, Lindsey Chapman as well will be back then too. So we've got a great week coming up.
We have. And those ospreys, of course.
And of course, we will keep an eye on that. If anything
LS7.
happens, we will let you know. Come on, honestly.
LS7.
I'm going to be watching that like a hawk.
Where is he? He's out there somewhere, just dawdling around, eating some trout,
He's
nibbling on a salmon.
He's taking his time. He wants to make a dramatic entrance.
All right, let's make a dramatic exit. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you later. Bye.
See you, bye.